Hello and welcome to our special roundtable, the NDTV roundtable at NASSCOM. I'm Anjana Menon. We will be talking about a wide range of issues today, but primarily focusing on how Asia and US will balance power in the new world order. We have Kiran Karnik. He is the past president of NASSCOM. There's Chris Gopalakrishnan, the chief of Infosys, sitting next to me. We have Michael Rogers, who says he's a practical futurist. We then have John Keppel from TPI. He's the Chief Marketing Officer. And last but not the least, there's Salil Parekh, the CEO of Capgemini. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today for this roundtable. The first question, which clearly, arguably, everyone in the world is talking about, is the shift of power to Asia from the US. In the old days, they would say when the US catches a cold, the world sneezes. And now, I suppose, when China pauses, everyone watches with bated breath. To what extent is that a shift that's irreversible? Kiran, if I could start with you.
I think it is substantially irreversible. Mainly because you're going back to what was the historical context of countries in Asia, particularly China and India, being dominant in the world economy. But the US is far from getting to a lower status. Its basic drive, its dynamism, its innovation, and of course its size are going to mean that it's going to continue to be one of the dominant powers, but one of them, not the dominant power.
I agree. We cannot write off US from an innovation perspective, from a dynamic economy perspective. If you look at how many global corporations are headquartered in the US, clearly you cannot write off US, and the shift is going to be happening over time. It's not going to happen immediately. So you need a steady force that will make sure that this transition happens in an orderly fashion, because in previous times when these transitions happen, it did not happen in a peaceful manner. So we need to make sure that these transitions happen in a peaceful manner.
I think that's an excellent point about making this transition a peaceful one, and I think that in the words of a former colleague of mine at Newsweek, Fareed Zakaria, what we're seeing really is what he calls the rise of the rest. It's not so much the decline of the United States, but the rise of the rest. Now, the United States is not necessarily that good at being a cooperative partner. That's what we're going to have to learn, I think, over the next decade or so, is how do we really collaborate rather than see ourselves as a driving force. It's kind of a personality shift in a way that I do think the United States is capable of, but we don't adjust quickly. So you need to have a little patience with us.
Staying on that for just a bit, China, which is probably the other elephant in the room, will it be easy for them to deal in particular with China? Is that going to be an easy partner to deal with?
No, I think that is going to be a bit difficult because, and I think in a way that's why India is probably a more attractive a partner as a world-class power than China, simply because the United States is so devoted to the notion of democracy. And that is a driving principle that in many cases overwhelms even financial interests for the United States. So that in particular makes it a little difficult to partner with China completely.
John, business is saying look east. Well, that's where the money is.
That's certainly where the activity is, and increasingly the profitability. So our data and research certainly supports that. I think that there are challenges that the other panelists have alluded to. There are certainly challenges in terms of viewing Asia as one. It isn't one. There are significant differences between the Asian powers. There will be significant differences in terms of their ability to cope with that speed of change. As was mentioned, change of that scale hasn't been done easily in the past. It has had all sorts of cultural implications and uprisings, and India's journey has been relatively peaceful, supported by democracy, supported by other elements of Indian culture and Indian cultural history, which are not shared in China. And so, I think that certainly this change is happening. There's no denying it, It's just the ease with which it's done and the uniformity or the assumption of uniformity across Asia.
Salil.
Well, first, there's no question the shift is happening, so support the views. My sense is the US will remain the largest power for a very long time. I don't think that's going to shift in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that's a very long time for a debate to happen. Clearly, China and India are emerging in different ways. These changes in any time when they happen so quickly have risks associated with them. And the risks can be played out in many different ways. If you take a small example like what's happening in Egypt, such a scenario might happen on a larger scale somewhere else. So as a world, we'll have to look to manage that risk if and when it shows up. And more critically, I think people, at least from what you see in the actions in China, India, US, are realizing that each are critically dependent on the other. There is no scenario in which one can succeed with the other failing. There's such ties that have already been developed. And so whatever, there might be some rhetoric which sounds appealing, but the underlying linkage is now become very strong. And it's difficult to walk away from that. So we're speaking about a scenario which is really out there in the future and quite intertwined.
I realize that everyone on the panel, of course, maintains that the US is going to be a big global power and it's going to be a power to reckon with and an economic superpower. But President Obama has, for the longest time, every speech that he can, alluded to the fact that please don't look at us to be the consumption basket. We don't want to be a nation that's constantly consuming. So could there be a shift where Asia then becomes the largest consumer because 40% of the population is divided between what, China and India? Absolutely.
I think the change will come when China's consumption and India's consumption become so dominant that the dependence may reduce. And then imagine a scenario where US companies are more required to cater to Chinese consumer demand. That might change the game. With small example with cars and GM, you can see a big shift with China becoming such a big market. But as a broader market, for that to happen, it'll still take some time. And again, we're sitting here, we project the last 5 years in a straight line out. It's rarely that's how it's going to happen. There's going to be some ups and downs. And when those happen, the ballast or the mainstay is still the US.
In fact, I would say it's already happening to some extent. This global economy, the global recession, which traditionally the United States is the tractor that pulls the rest of the world out of the ditch. This time it's really the rest of the world's consumption. If you look at the American stock market, it's doing very well. But it's doing well because most of the major companies are making their money overseas.
And the rest of the world's consumption, or specifically Asia's consumption, is of real interest here because the focus of Asian companies needs to increasingly be into the domestic Asian markets because that's where the growth is coming from. And a lot of those businesses have had for the longest time, and arguably since their inception, a focus on the US market, particularly in terms of the IT services community. So